She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frack, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For Catacrow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Catacrow, Dagabag, donkey bray, horse and they even duck a quack. Catacrow, Dagabag, donkey bray, horse and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country.
It is come and tell the people this sweet story, And that's what happens right here on Anansi Web Education. We tell the sweet stories, we tell the not so sweet stories, and we tell the stories that were untold. And so that's what we do. Good night to all of you, wherever you are. Welcome to Anansi Web Education. With me is no stranger, the man who had to undo so many things. A wrecked country that was left behind in 2015 by the PPP regime. President David Arthur Granger. Good night to you, sir. How are you doing?
Well, it's always good to be on this program. I'm well in the circumstances. Looking forward to change next year, 2025, so that the people of this country could be relieved of some of this pressure that they've been under for the last 50 months. But, I believe we can make it, and I believe that Anansi Web Education is contributing to educating the general public to the possibilities of a better life and to become aware of the damage that has been taking place over the last 50 months.
Lots and lots of damages indeed. One woman commented, she said that under the coalition, under Granger's presidency, they hardly had blackout, all manner of things. And they said every day, constant blackout upon blackout. And people are hungry for a change. A good change again. We had that in the coalition, for the most part, a good change. And the incompetency that we're seeing every single day, the corruption, all manner of things. People are just sick and tired of that sort of politicking. And they can't wait for 2025, President Granger. They can't wait for 2025. For some reason, they just can't wait and get all those crowds back, the green, get them back. All right, so tonight our discussion, and again, good night to all of you, wherever whether you're Blackbush Polder, you're in Linden, you're in Ituni, Kokwani, Bartica, Lethem, wherever you are, West Coast Berbice, East Bank, West Bank, East Coast, right in Georgetown. We can't forget the folks of the quarantine as well. Alnis Village, Philippi, Auckland. Let me not leave out Auckland. You're smiling. Let me not leave out Auckland and Rose Hall. Tonight's discussion, though, we want to talk about October 2024. And on October 2024 marks the 67th anniversary of the establishment of the People's National Congress. Despite its long existence, however, the identity of the People's National Congress and the integrity of a partnership of for national unity seem to be passing through a crisis. Interesting. Passing through a crisis. Seems like it's going to be a really, really good topic tonight. And so this takes us to our first question to President Granger. Why has it been said that the People's National Congress is facing an identity crisis?
Well, a crisis is not necessarily fatal. It just means that it's an opportunity for making a change, an opportunity for decision making. It just means that something in the system indicates that you need to pay attention to correcting it. And I would say that the identity crisis comes from several factors. To start with, the PNC, established 6 or 7 years ago, embraced socialism. Socialism was popular in those days. It was left-wing philosophy. But naturally, since the decline or the disappearance of the Soviet Union and the socialist bloc, there are very few countries that speak of socialism. And I think socialism has been necessary as a phase of Guyanese development. But right now, we need to ensure that our core beliefs are relevant to the needs of the people. So there's a crisis of credo. What do you believe? And whatever you come up with, the PNC believed in workers, believed in improved wages, welfare, and safety for workers. And they believe in cooperating with business, cooperating with all the ethnic groups in the country. So the core beliefs haven't changed, although the labels might have changed. We still believe in emphasizing education, particularly at the primary and secondary level, universal primary education, universal secondary education, making sure that every child gets into school. We still believe in employment for young people. That is why we set up the Guyana Youth Corps, which is PPP. In the form of the National Service in 2000, PPP just dissolved to the Guyana National Service. But we set it up again, and the PPP dissolved it again. But this was a means of training young people for proper employment, not to sweep the streets. Well, there are people who sweep the streets, with buckets, basins, and brooms. But we wanted to see other forms of employment because a lot of young people are leaving the country. We want to see empowerment. That is why the PNC reintroduced local government elections after the PVP failed to hold elections for 20 years. They set up a lot of interim management committees. And we had to get rid of those IMCs and have democratic elections. And we wanted to see a clean environment. We promulgated the local, the Guyana Green State Development Strategy, and the PPP had their own local LCDS, the Low Carbon Development Strategy. Well, we believe our strategy was superior. It wasn't a money-making strategy. It was a strategy to protect the environment. We proposed the changes in the public security. We got experts to redesign security for our borders and our territory. And we brought piracy and gun violence and narco trafficking down to a very low level. And unfortunately, we see narco trafficking is back, making headline news. Cocaine is coming in this country by the plane load. We proposed social cohesion. So I'm saying that the PNC had core beliefs, and there should be no crisis as to what the PNC believes. There's a crisis, yes, in the coalition. The AFC is withdrawn from the coalition, and we need to meet the other parties in the APNU, the Guyana Action Party, the Equal Rights and Justice Party, the National Front Alliance, and the Guyana Nation Builders. And the PNC needs to engage them, but unfortunately, over the last 2 years, 2.5 years, they have been, In fact, the other partners met among themselves, and the PNC seems to have refused to meet with them and to provide leadership to the APNU. In light of the coming elections next year, I think this crisis in the coalition needs to be resolved. There's also a crisis in terms of the way our MPs function, the recognition given to the MPs. It's very disheartening when we see, MPs being shunted aside or being deprived of their responsibilities. MPs are very important because people vote for MPs to represent them in the National Assembly. So when you see the MP who is responsible for legal affairs not being appointed to the Reform Committee, the Constitution Reform Committee, or when you see the MP responsible for foreign affairs not being invited to meetings which discuss foreign, you wonder what's happening. So there is a question, there is a crisis in the Constitution. There's also a crisis in terms of the functioning of Ghanaian youth and student movement. And many people don't know whether this organization is functional at all, whether the National Congress of Women is functional, because they're not seeing much activity. I may be wrong, but this seems to me to be part of the crisis. And there's also a crisis, I would say, in elections. I suppose this is the most visible crisis, the electoral crisis. When local government elections were held in 2023, the PNC won 14 out of 80 local authority areas. That is, if your child came home from school and said, "Daddy, I got 17% in mathematics," as old people would say, you tend to his memory, to encourage him to perform better next time. But 17.5% of the seats is not a good performance. The PNC lost seats in Anne Regina. It lost two seats in Bartica. It lost seats in Coribaton. It lost seats in Georgetown. It lost seats in Linden. It lost seats in Mabaruma. It lost seats in Amsterdam. It lost seats in Rose Hall. It lost, in all, the PNC lost over 12,760 votes between in 2016 and 2023. It lost all 4 of the hinterland towns, which the APNU set up between 2015 and 2020. APNU created those towns at Mabaruma, Bartica, Mahdia, and Lethem. PNC lost all of them. And PPP now controls 7 out of 10 towns. The PNC is holding on, even though it has recorded losses, holding on to Georgetown, Amsterdam, and Linden. But even there, its majority is diminishing. So this is a serious crisis. So I would say that people feel there's an identity crisis and they want to know what their party stands for in the face of all of these losses, in the face of the changing ideology. What do we believe in and what do we stand for? And what are we going to do in 2025? That's why I say, that's why people say there's an identity crisis. Is there an identity crisis? We must answer these questions.
We must answer these questions indeed. If you're now joining us, tonight's discussion, as we prepare on October 2024, of course, this year marks the 67th anniversary of the establishment of the People's National Congress. Despite its long existence, however, the identity of the People's National Congress and the integrity of a partnership for national unity seem to be passing through a crisis. Brings us to the second question, President Granger. What did this so-called identity crisis in the party emerge, or it should be, when did this so-called identity crisis in the People's National Congress reform emerge?
To be fair, well, since we're talking about old age, since we're talking about aging process, it is not a sudden event. It occurred over a long period of time. And when I look back at the Congress speeches of former President Desmond Hoyt, you can see that he was aware of the need to change. And in fact, my last Congress speech in 2021 was on the same theme, the need to change. So change is continuous. You cannot remain a vibrant organization unless you change to adapt to new conditions and new circumstances. When this crisis emerged, I suppose it's like a chronic disease. Not that I feel the PNC is diseased, but it needs to review what has been happening. And as you know, Mr. Hoyt was challenged for his leadership in the PNC. Mr. Corbyn was challenged, and I was challenged for my leadership. So over a period of over 20 years, there have been challenges. But the challenge itself is not necessarily a symptom of an identity crisis. I feel that in my case, what symbolized the crisis was at Congress, the 18th Congress in 2014, when the PPP actually financed, it was intended to be a coup d'etat, but actually financed a rebel group to try to seize control of the party at its Congress, its 18th Congress in July 2014. And then I realized how serious that crisis was, that there were people who were prepared to accept money from an agent of the PPP in order to remove the democratically elected leader and central committee of its own party. So you can see then that these people don't believe in anything. They don't have principles. They don't have a sort of ethical code. They don't have an ideology. So I would say that the Congress of the 18th Congress of July 2014 was a sign of a serious disease. And I must admit that this re-emerged after 2020, general and regional elections. And at that time, even though the matter of a code had been discussed, and we agreed that we needed younger people, we needed gender balance, we needed geographical spread, we needed people who were qualified to hold political office. There are certain core principles which were agreed. And after GRE 2020, these core principles were applied to the selection of, from our candidates, selection of people to go into the National Assembly. At one level, the partners were told that they needed to go out and vigorously campaign. And two of the partners just refused to campaign. Well, you can't get into office if you don't campaign. They refused to make contributions to the APNU, and they withdrew. Well, that is one level of the crisis. At another level, many of the older persons, retirees, pensioners, just hope to go squatting in the National Assembly forever. And many of the younger MPs who were elected are sometimes over 20 years younger than some of the older MPs. So this created a problem. And I'm glad to see that some of the persons who were in that cohort are holding high office still within the PNC. The General Secretary is a member of that cohort. The previous General Secretary was a member of that cohort. The previous General Secretary is a member of that cohort. So it is impossible to say that members of the cohort, by and large, were unsuitable. So I would say that the question of selection of crisis, how long or when did the crisis emerge? It has been simmering for some time. And I think only with my removal or my decision when I was 75 years old, I was 75 years old in July 2020, that's no secret, that's public knowledge. And I made it clear that I didn't feel that I should continue as leader, to accept, nomination to be leader of the PNC. And I made it clear that I wouldn't accept nomination to be leader of the PNC after July 2020. And I think that is when maybe a new phase of the rivalry opened for people who wanted to be leader. And this is what we have now. We have a rivalrous situation, and I would say it has entered a new phase. But many of the reforms which Mr. Hoyt recommended, many of the reforms which I recommended to bring about change, were never really implemented. And I would say that the crisis has been simmering for a long time, and we are where we are now because of that crisis, and people must make up their mind whether they move forward or they stand still.
Indeed, and that takes us to our third question. Thank you so much for that second one in terms of responding to when did this so-called identity crisis in the party emerge. Takes us to our third question for tonight. What has been the impact of the Shurian conspiracy on the PNC? And the Shurian conspiracy is something we spoke about 2 weeks ago, and it had to do with the CDC and millions of dollars thrown out to allegedly folks who were connected to the PNC and so forth, allegedly. But the question tonight is, what has been the impact of the Shurian conspiracy on the PNC?
It has been very damaging, and many of us who were around at that time in July 2014 were relieved that the conspiracy was defeated within the ambit of the party's constitution. It was clear that an attempt was made to circumvent the rules for holding Congress and to create a special group which was funded by the PPP, which did not conform to or comply with the requirements for nominating delegates, which was supported by 1 week of whole-page advertisements, which was provided with paid transportation to come from its region into Georgetown, which was equipped with uniforms and which was given stipends. Now, some of these assets and resources were beyond the logistical or financial capability of that group, and the funds were provided from the CDC, the Community Development Council. It's a PPP slush fund. So the impact was severe because people realized that this type of illegal action could come within a hair's breadth of removing an elected leadership of a party which had been around for nearly 60 years. So it wasn't shattering, but it certainly dented the image of the party, which is run by certain institutions. One is the sanctity of Congress, and some of these rebels actually invaded the Congress with placards and slogans. Two, it meant that Congress itself was threatened. Three, it meant that the Central Executive Committee could have been populated by people who did not have the best interests of the party in mind. And fourth, it disregarded the will of the majority by thinking that a small group of noisy people could actually take control of the party. This is what happens in military coup d'etat in some of the developing countries around the world, that a small armed group could actually hold the entire population at ransom. And I would say the damage, although a decade has passed, the damage has not completely been erased. There's some people who think that unconstitutional measures could work, could succeed in bringing about change, which their own abilities cannot, their own appeal to the public would not be able to bring about. And I would say that was a certainly a dark period. It was certainly a threat. And, you can compare it to a lot of incidents around the world. I mean, remember in the United States, up to now, you're still hearing, getting the fallout of the attempt to reverse the constitutional decision of the elections by storming Congress. There's some people like that. There's some people believe that violence and unconstitutional behavior could succeed. Well, the PNC was victim of that, and the PPP was behind the conspiracy. And of course, the damage has not been completely repaired.
We want to touch on this question, President Granger, and it's a very important question, like the others. For those of you who are now joining, good night and welcome to Anansi Web Education with me, no stranger, President David Arthur Granger, the man who brought Guyana back after 23 plus years of misery under the PPP. Yep, we knew what it was like. People are complaining about blackouts upon blackouts and dirty water, rundown education sector, rundown health sector, all manner of things. I just thought I mentioned this here as we talk about the crisis. I just thought I mentioned that. And it takes us now to the second to last question, President Granger. Who is responsible for the crisis in a partnership for national unity? And before you respond, let's give the viewers an opportunity to grab a glass of Mobby or whatever it is as you prepare to respond to this question. And I'll repeat it. Who is responsible for the crisis in a partnership for national unity? President Granger?
Well, whether they grab for a glass of Mobby, I mean, I think many people living in Guyana would be surprised to grab for a glass of coconut water, because I reckon that liter for liter, coconut water is more expensive than imported orange juice, imported Tropicana orange juice. So it's not, the cost of living is not something to ignore in this country. Who's responsible? Who can be responsible other than the party itself? It has been established that the PPP was behind the mischief of the Shurian conspiracy, but the Shurian conspiracy was an event which occurred during a particular period. And if the observance of constitutional norms had prevailed, people would have been chased away from the party. And in fact, this is what happened at Congress in July 2014, that the small group of persons had been isolated, and the bulk of the members just completely disagreed with what they were trying to do. So it was not a popular revolt, it was an attempt by a coup, an attempt to bring about change by a coup, by a small group of persons. So I cannot pin down one person being responsible, but certainly the PPP and a particular member of the PPP was responsible for pumping money and for making an arrangement with rogue members of the PNC to bring about a change in the leadership. And who was the beneficiary? Well, we know who was the likely beneficiary of that conspiracy, but it just showed that people were prepared to betray their own party in order to install a particular personality, not because something was wrong with the party, not because the party is behaving in a reckless manner, but because the PPP was afraid of the strength of the APNU. And the year after that conspiracy, the PPP's worst nightmares, were realized. That is, the PPP was removed from office in May 2015. And it tried to prevent that. in July 2014. That is what the conspiracy was all about. The PPP was prepared to finance a change in the APNU in order to prevent the APNU from pursuing its policy, which was holding the PPP to account for mismanagement of this country. That is exactly what was happening. It was a PPP plot, but there were a few rogues. There were a few rogues in the PNC who were prepared to be bought out. And this happens in every country, in every group, I suppose. And that's what treason is all about.
All right. Well said, President David Otto Granger, as we discuss the crisis. And October 24th, the People's National Congress Reform will celebrate its 67th anniversary. And tonight's topic is, despite its long existence, however, the identity of the People's National Congress and the integrity of a partnership for national unity seem to be passing through crisis. Some may ask whether there's still APNU. There's still a partnership for national unity, where you expect some sort of unity at the political front. Unfortunately, it seems to be absent. This takes us now to our final question for tonight. President Granger, how did the crisis affect the People's National Congress's performance in the local government elections?
Well, it could be clearly seen that the performance of the party and partnership in the local government election in 2023 was very disappointing. For a party
that's putting it lightly. Very
right.
Disappointing.
It was a disaster. It was catastrophic, and I don't think we should try to, as President Obama said, put lipstick on a pig. And I use the word pig advisedly. We shouldn't try to make it look beautiful. It was not a victory. It was not a success. It was central. Local government election was central to the philosophy of the PNC because it was meant to empower ordinary people in the villages, in the neighborhoods, in the regions. And what happened is that in arithmetical terms, the PNC only won, 17.5% of the local authority areas. It lost all 4 hinterland towns, and we had strong support in the hinterland because those 4 towns at Mabruma, Bartica, Mahdi, and Letem were actually established by the APNU in fulfillment of its philosophy. And the fact is that prior to that, those areas were run by interim management committees, and they were run by village councils. Can you imagine an area the size of Bartica, which is bigger than the Netherlands, running that region, Region 7, Kuyuni Mazruni region, with a village council? So the town had to be created. Bartica had to be created as a town. Mabaruma had to be created. Mahdi had to be created. Letem is now running an area which is bigger than Costa Rica. It's now the capital town. So we were really quite disappointed that the 4 towns that had been created by APNU have now all been lost to the PPP, which had no... PPP almost took joy in reducing the councils there to interim management committees. It meant that they would send on the Minister of Local Government, and he would just remove the elected council and appoint a group of people of his own choosing. So it was the elections of the local government election 2023 were more than a catastrophe. So the APNU ended up losing 4 towns. So the PPP now controls 7 out of 10 towns. But the APNU ended up losing more than 12,000 votes than it gained a few years before. So something else has to happen, or had to have happened, to prevent the APNU from even performing at the level it was performing years earlier. So what I would say in answer to your question is that the crisis is not just some academic setback. It is not just a question of laziness or laissez-faire. It is a question of organizational and operational efficiency, which has to be rectified in time for general and regional elections in 2025. These issues are not just numbers. These issues represent an erosion of the strength of the PNC APNU. And the PNC APNU was strong enough in 2020 to win nearly 218,000 votes, to win 31 seats. So it cannot be said that the PNC APNU was weak at that time. Something has happened to reduce or diminish the strength of the party and the organization. And I am very confident that the bulk of the people are still with us, with the party, and they need to be assured that we could remove the burden of the PPP administration in 2025 general and regional elections. It is not going to be easy, and some of the damage which has been caused has to be repaired if we're going to be ready and provide the quality of representation that our people looked to us for, at least 4 years ago. So I would say that the crisis was severe, but we can overcome that crisis because we have the experience, we have the expertise, and we have people, we have masses of support who are prepared to come out once they are assured that they'll be given the quality leadership that can remove the PPP. And right now, that is what is causing the crisis, that there is some doubt, there's some anxiety, there's some uncertainty, and we need to take a positive line and get the party, get our partnership moving again. The crisis is solvable, quite frankly. It is solvable. We were in a bad position before, but we've improved between 2015 and 2020, and now 2025 is approaching. We must be resolute in removing the PPP and restoring a democratic government that the people can support and look forward to improve the quality of life and lower the cost of living too.
Thank you so much, President Granger. And again, just a reminder for those who joined late, we dealt with October 24th marks the 67th anniversary of the establishment of the People's National Congress. And despite its long existence, however, the identity of the People's National Congress and the integrity of a partnership for national unity seem to be passing through crisis. We've dealt with several questions tonight: why, when, what, who, and how. Large crowds. Look at the support. And I agree with you, President Granger, the support is still there. You just need to tap into it and get it back up and running. I'm not sure, but it's still there. Lots of that support is still there. Thank you for this evening. Thank you for answering those questions. I appreciate it as always, and looking forward to having you back again next week, right here, same place, same time. Thank you so much, President Granger. Appreciate it.
Thank you and good night.
And thank you to all our listeners as well. Yep. God bless.
God bless.
All day a back now, me now I come home. Inaga, jackass, I for fetchy load. Cockle shy hand, bag over shoulder, running by his side, a Rexy and Rover. From the farm, them a come. Sun a go down but up the river. Some washing clothes, some folks are bathing at the water. Fishermen, they catch them a bring. From a canoe boat, man, them start offloading. Aymara, Kwakwari, Gale Baka Kuma Kuma, even Lokonani. Aymara, Kwakwari.